بسم الله الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وأصحابه ومن والاه ما بعد السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. باب ستر عورات المسلمين والنهي عن إشاعتها لغير ضرورة. 28th chapter of Riyad us-Saliheen. Imam al-Nawawi rahimahullah ta'ala, the author, he says, chapter concealing the faults of the Muslims and the prohibition of spreading them without necessity. So this chapter is about Satru Awrat al-Muslimin, concealing the awrah of the Muslims and the prohibition of spreading them without necessity. So first and foremost, what is meant by the word Awrat al-Muslimin? What is meant by the awrah of the Muslims? Now, Ibn Uthaymeen rahimahullah ta'ala, he says, awrah is of two types. That which is ma'nawiyya and that which is hissiyya. So, hissiyya is your physical, tangible types of awrah, like that which is haram to look at. For example, the private parts, right? Or what's below what's between the navel and the knees for the men. That's the awrah. And the woman, it's her whole body, except for her face and hands, according to some views, and according to some ulama, even the face is awrah. Awrah ma'nawiyya is what is actually intended by this chapter. Ma'nawiyya means it's not something that's physical, not something that is tangible. Rather, it is the faults of the person, like his bad akhlaq or his bad deeds. So we are not talking necessarily about his body parts, physical. We're not talking about that type of awrah in this chapter. Okay? And Shaykh Ibn Uthaymeen mentions, Allah says about insan, إِنَّهُ كَانَ ظَلُومًا جَهُولًا. That how Allah describes insan is with two things. Zaluman, they are people of dhulm, and they are jahula, people of ignorance. And the Shaykh explains, he says, when people do bad deeds purposefully, they know what they're doing is haram and yet they do it, this is a zalim. He's a zalim. And when people are doing wrong deeds ignorantly, then he's a jahil. So whenever people are sinning, he's either a zalim or he's a jahil. He's one of the two. Hence Allah said what? إِنَّهُ كَانَ ظَلُومًا جَهُولًا. This is at the end of Surah Al-Ahzab. إِنَّهُ كَانَ ظَلُومًا جَهُولًا. So the Shaykh says, except those whom Allah Azza wa Jal has protected, those whom Allah Azza wa Jal has guided, He's given them knowledge and He's turned them away from sins. These people are protected from this. However, the nature of insan is they are committing sin. Either zaliman or jahulan, they are committing sin. And so our duty is to cover up those sins and not to expose those sins. Not to expose those sins for without any valid reason. Okay? So the Shaykh says, as an example, if you see somebody doing business and he is perhaps cheating or he's deceiving people, then your duty is not to tell the whole world, but to give him a nasiha. And you can perhaps warn the person that you are being deceived, but it's not to go out on social media or go to every person in the mosque and every person in the community and say, hey, this person is like this and this person did this. Tayyib, you give him nasiha. The Shaykh says, take another example. You know of someone, mubtala bin nazari ila nisa. He's afflicted. He's being tested with what? A weakness, which is looking at women, looking at the opposite sex. He doesn't lower his gaze. So what do we do about him? The Shaykh says, fastur alayh. You conceal that sin of his. And you give him nasiha. Between you and him. And you explain to him, هَذَا سَهْمٌ مِنْ سِهَامِ إِبْلِيسِ. That this is a arrow from the arrows of Iblis. The gaze. That when it's not controlled, it's like an arrow that you are shooting from the arrows of shaitan. And that then leads to more sins and more sins, which eventually leads a person to zina. وَنَعُوذُ بِاللَّهِ. But it always starts with the gaze. But the point here is, you don't go out and expose the person. I found this person watching this haram thing. I saw this person looking at this haram thing. And we go announce it to the world. This is not the way of Islam. Not the way of the Muslims. Rather, we make satir for our brothers and our sisters. We conceal their sins unless there's a maslaha rajiha, or there's a darura, there's a necessity here for us to do what? For us to maybe expose the sin. For us to maybe point out that, because we're talking about a sin that could be harmful to others. If it's doing something that can affect the community, can affect others, then there might be a need to expose the sin or to warn against him. From this is also what we call refutation. Why do scholars speak about other scholars? Some people can't understand this. Why can't we just sit with each other? Go to him, talk to him privately. Why do you have to warn against him? If the person is calling to misguidance, if the person is calling to bid'ah or to shirk, and is doing it publicly, our duty is to warn against him publicly. Right? Our duty is to warn against him publicly, because there's a need for it. There's a darura here. And so forth. But with private sins, we never ever go and we expose people's sins. We always try to conceal the sin. This is the asl. So this is the chapter that we are starting bi'idhnillahi ta'ala. Tomorrow there's a verse for us to look at from Surah An-Nur. Very important. And then we'll get to the ahadith in this chapter bi'idhnillahi ta'ala. Barakallahu feekum wa sallallahu ala nabiyyina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Subhanakallahumma wa bihamdika ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta astaghfiruka wa atubu ilaik. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.